Before we get into today's video, I just want to quickly mention our second wallpaper pack is now available on the Spacedock Patreon, alongside our reference books and early access to videos. Check them out in the description and pinned comment below. I've been watching Alien Earth, and it's a really good show so far. The way it used three things, the spaceship, its interior, and the pulse rifles, got me thinking about the idea of design language. So that's what we're going to talk about today, the details and elements that make an object feel like it's part of something larger. Now this all starts with Maginot, the deep space research ship that shares some similarities with the Nostromo that we all know and love. This is mostly in the interior, which we'll talk about in a little bit, though the outside does have the same engines. But really, what is the design language of spaceships from Alien? Nostromo is a big, grey, greebly ship with huge engine pods that befit its status as a tug. What's unique about it are the various square features, particularly the angled landing engines and the downward pointing antennas. The other famous ship from the franchise, Sulaco, shares none of these features, but that's fine, it's an entirely different type of vessel. There's huge differences between real-life industrial ships, warships, and cruise ships, so why would a fictional assault ship look like a fictional modified freighter? That's why that little transport in Romulus, the Corbelan 4, fits into the setting so well. It took the design language of Nostromo, but shrunk it down a lot, which works because they are both industrial ships from the same time period that barely land on planets. The specifics of what they do differs, but because they share details and shape in their forward and vertical thrusters, they feel like part of the same world. But I do feel that without those similar engines, both the Maginot and the Corbelan 4 would be fairly standard sci-fi industrial ships. To be honest, it's kind of the same with the Nostromo, really. Its big greebly grey self could fit alongside big greebly grey ships in 2001, or even Star Wars. And that's an interesting franchise because of how varied the design language of the ships in it really are. Overall, there's the idea of used future, but Star Destroyers aren't really used and old, are they? But they are a perfect example of using shape for a design language. If it's a huge grey Dorito with balls on its head, then it's probably a Star Destroyer. Other factions don't really do anything as unified as that, but they generally stick to the somewhat greebled used future look. A big exception to this is the sleek, shiny, and pristine ships of Naboo. I find it fascinating that something like this can exist within Star Wars without feeling out of place within it. Perhaps that's just because it's been part of my life since I was a kid. I wonder if that clean look felt out of place to adults when the movie first came out. The other big design language thing that Star Wars often uses is variable geometry, which when combined with used future, instantly says Star Wars to me. Oh, wait, hang on. Okay, so maybe not every time. Star Trek, overall, is a pretty similar deal, though here the design language for each major faction is significantly more prominent. Starfleet ships especially due to the iconic layout of two hull sections with prominent warp drives. These individual elements have often been moved around, scaled up and down, or had their shape and number changed to come up with new silhouettes. It's that language that has kept Starfleet ships so recognisable through the decades as many talented people contributed to the whole. And that too has led to a lot of interesting design dialects within the overall design language of Starfleet, generally separated into generations. I want to highlight Diogo Vincenzi's gorgeous Kusanagi class to demonstrate how flexible this is. This ship takes the popular shape of the Akira class, but styles it as if it was from the motion picture era. This is a fan design, but the mixing of styles from different eras is something we've seen in official Trek media too. Star Trek Online is notable here because it does a lot of this, and the amazing art team over there even came up with their own really strong design dialect, and this was so good it ended up being used in the Picard show. Of course, there's some other settings with their own really strong design languages. Warhammer 40k's techno-gothic Imperials, Fallout's various takes on retrofuturism, and many more. Another one I want to highlight for its spaceships is Homeworld. In this case, the designs are partly down to the technical limitations of the time, which is why the ships are fairly polygonal with simple but interesting surface details and paint jobs. The artists for those games worked miracles. Like, did you know that the tie-down Interceptor's texture is a whole 25 kilobytes? That's nuts, and those limits contributed to a style that remains special and unique to this day. The later games in the setting built on those early foundations and successfully translated the design language to ground vehicles and a new generation of ships. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for Mass Effect, since Andromeda moved away from the extremely distinct look of the original trilogy. In those, the design language was defined by this curve and the works of Sid Mead, and all that played a big part in the overall identity of the setting. Andromeda went with a more generic modern sci-fi style, you know, that look of Star Citizen and stuff like that, and lost a lot of charm in the process. Hopefully the next game, if it ever actually gets made, goes back to its original style. That's enough about exterior design language. I did also promise to talk about interior design language, and that's something that Alien Earth does really well, as did Isolation and Romulus. Which makes sense, the interior is where pretty much everything actually happens after all. All these later entries take their cue from Nostromo, which is notable because that ship actually splits its interior into two distinct styles. There's one for the main habitation areas that are all bright and padded. This makes them comfortable safe havens in the movie, away from the dark and dangerous industrial areas where the titular alien lurks. That second style did such a great job of being spooky and unsettling that Dead Space took heavy inspiration from it for its own environments. One of the bigger design language elements in Alien is the ship controls and interfaces. There's lots of chunky physical controls, cathode ray tube style screens, and big blinky lights. These days, this aged cassette futurism style is a strong indicator that something is in the Alien franchise, but it's only really that way because it's seated in the technology of the era the original movies were made in. Did you even notice that one of the clips there was from 2010, the year we make contact? Points if you did. Alien Earth also rightfully sticks with the physical controls for most stuff, but also augments that with higher tech stuff like the gesture control for screens in the high-tech lab in the show. It's a pretty interesting blend of old and new in that sense. Since we're now back on the TV show, I gotta talk about the pulse weapons, which are kind of interesting, maybe? They're also pretty lame though. Like, yeah, transplanting the carry handle, barrel shroud, and lit-up ammo counter does make the guns look like pulse weapons. In terms of design language, that does work, it's just sort of boring and safe. They've not shown up yet in the show as of recording, but there's an even worse Chris Vector pulse weapon too. Like, I get it, TV budget and all, but why have an actual M41 from Aliens? Romulus had the better idea of making a thing that resembled the iconic weapons from Aliens in form and function, but it was also very different and new. Something like that would have been better for the TV show, but as I said, budget. In the grand scheme of things, it's minor because these weapons are just there for vibes. But then there's these brand new aircraft that bring their own new look to the franchise. Am I crazy, but do these have a faint resemblance to the Cheyenne dropship? The last thing for design languages that I want to talk about today is that they can also come from specific artists, or be made to meet the tastes of a lead creative. Take the brutalism that Villeneuve favours, even across different movies, or the great work of Viktor Antonov, whose distinct style comes through in both Dishonored and Half-Life 2. Of course, there are other things you can do with design language by using common tropes like space brick for human ships, curvy blobs for aliens, stuff like that, but that's a discussion for another time. Today was more about the design language of individual settings, though as we saw, there's often a lot of similarities and crossovers, which shows that there is no best way to approach things. You can support Spacedock by joining our Patreon, where you can get our frigate, fighter, and carrier design reference books, as well as 1 week early access to upcoming videos. Thanks to our supporters, and thank you for watching.